Welcome back to the Act 2 podcast, a podcast for the real-life working screenwriter. I am Tasha Hugh.
And I am Josh Hallman.
And we are Act 2.
We're Act 2. We're back.
We're extra back. In the early days in 2019, when we first started this podcast, Josh, and we met in your office, face-to-face, in person, we drank while we recorded. It didn't matter what time of day it was.
That would be correct. I don't know if that was a great idea or not. But however, we're getting ready to start the podcast. We're on here, we're chatting, and then all of a sudden Tasha just drops the bomb on me, says, feels like we should have a drink. To which my ears perked up.
I've never seen you more alive.
I thought it was a test, and it wasn't. We're having a glass of wine.
I've also never seen you move so fast when you realized it wasn't a test.
I take these when you see the window, you have to just go right through it.
So here we are. We are doing one of our, I think, more fun episodes, at least for Josh and I. So hopefully you enjoy it too. It's a mailbag episode where we get to actually answer your questions, real questions that we've had from writers. And that's just way more fun than us talking about lame things like craft.
I love it. I love talking about craft. But no, these are fun. And a lot of times I have to say we kind of lost track of some of the emails that had come through. We were just looking through. We were a couple months behind. Some of them are a little longer. It required an answer over a podcast rather than writing people back, because if you guys didn't know, you can always write us and we'll usually respond. But sometimes the questions warrant a full episode. They really do.
They do. There's some really great ones.
Yeah. So, yeah, we have a Q&A. Do you have any this week in writing?
I didn't get any writing done this week. That's my this week in writing.
I think I have one.
Okay,
this week in writing.
This week in writing.
This just came to me. I was thinking, you and I are writing something together, and we recently we hopped on a Zoom, and you had basically read through the entire script, and you're like, something just doesn't feel right about it. And you ended up, I think, pinpointing somewhere along the way. But I was just kind of thinking about our process and how often these things happen where you and we've written a couple passes on this and we've outlined it, and you got hung up on something. And I appreciated that we ended up talking about it, because maybe at a different time, or if this were a different scenario, it'd be like, I'm sure it's fine. Let's just power through. And I'm just bringing this up because it's all part of the process. And I think it's like a normal writing thing where it can feel not discouraging, but you're just like, oh man, did we miss something? What but this is just all part of it. It's all part of it. Fortunately, we've had each other to talk to about it.
Yeah. That's super helpful.
Yeah, man. Writing with someone else is awesome.
Because when it's just you and something's wrong, it's really hard sometimes to figure out what the hell that is.
Yeah.
And then the more drafts you do, the more wrong it is, and then you just don't know why. And so, yeah, it's super helpful to have someone that you trust that you can bounce ideas off of.
Oh, man. Writing with I'm very envious now of people who have been writing partners for like 10 to 12 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're like, this is our process. That'd be just amazing to just have someone you can always.
Like Ben Lustig and Jake Thornton, whom we had on the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Who are
absolutely.
Just a beast of a writing team. Also, speaking to your, like piggybacking off of your This Week in Writing, what was so cool about that little Zoom we had, which was like 30 minutes, was you were bumping on something that I wasn't bumping on, but as part of being a writing partner and as part of just listening to anyone giving notes, it's like, well, you're bumping on something. Let's figure out what the hell it is. And so we just kind of like kept pushing at the thing that you were bumping on until we figured out what it really was, because then you can address like that issue. And I think you had a legitimate issue. So I think we came up with a cooler solution, because it wasn't just like, hey, disregarding Josh because I disagree with him, or hey, let's just go with the solution and figure out if it doesn't work later, and I'll ignore my gut. It was like really getting into the note, which I think is great. And then on top of that, I actually had a similar experience of that just today on a show that I'm working on, where an executive producer gave a note where they said, this isn't like 3 episodes and your show is not working for me. And we've already seen animatic for it. We're already pretty deep in.
You mean the first 3, not the 3rd episode?
3 episodes together.
I
it's
see.
like the whole last 3. So like the whole finale of the season wasn't really landing. And so we had to have this meeting and really try. And he was like, it's kind of vague. I don't even know exactly specifically why I'm feeling this or where, but generally this is how I'm feeling. And then we just kept talking about it and talking about it and talking about it until we got to basically its like smallest form, until we could figure out, okay, now that it's at its smallest form, meaning you got as specific and I like could figure out specifically what you're bumping on, then here's how I can address it. I can't address like your vague notion. I don't know what to do with that.
Right.
So that's something. It's just a good writing lesson, right? Is when someone has a note and you don't understand it or you don't agree with it, don't ignore it. Just try to figure out what it's about.
Yeah, it's easy also when you trust the other person. If you're talking to someone that you've never really talked to about writing, maybe you end up kind of, sweeping something under the rug where you're kind of like, okay, that's that person's opinion. But when you have a relationship with someone, if they're bumping on something else, you hear them out. You try to figure out what the heck is going on and why they feel that way.
Yeah.
So that's all. I guess that was my This Week in Writing.
Okay.
Well, I guess we'll just move on to the main topic. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. This is going to sound, I don't want to say basic or anything like that. This is a term we've all heard a million times. And I'm just bringing this up because maybe it gets overlooked or I don't know, but I'm bringing this up. I was talking to somebody and we were talking about the call to adventure in movies, which is a pretty common screenwriting term, or the call to action. And we're discussing what that means and what does it mean for a character and what your character is going through when they receive the call to adventure. We started to talk about the movie John Wick. My friend was saying, that call to adventure or call to action was when the dog was murdered. And I was like, well, wait a minute. And then we started to talk about what an inciting incident is and if it's the same thing. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on the call to adventure and if it's something that is constantly in your mind when writing a feature. It's unavoidable.
Yeah. I don't know if I necessarily term it the call to adventure when I'm thinking about it in my own stuff. So the call to adventure is typically like the break into Act 2, right?
Well, this is exactly what we were talking about. Because, like, for instance, in my mind, the call to adventure was when Luke receives Leia's hologram, or when Nemo is taken and his dad now suddenly has to go across the ocean, or even when Indy is asked to get the Ark in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Or are those the inciting incidents?
I fucking hate screenwriting books.
I know. Does it even matter?
So here's the thing to your example about Luke Skywalker. Because there's some screenwriting books that will tell you that a call to adventure comes earlier when a hero is presented with the call and then resists the call only to later accept the call, which would be typically the break into Act 2. Is the accepting of the call. Now I'm on the adventure of the movie. And Act 2 is like the promise of the premise of this movie. The adventures of being Luke in Star Wars in this huge war that he was never a part of because he was a farmer. Which is fine. But try to fucking write to that from the beginning and that's impossible. And this is why screenwriting books are kind of bullshit, because we could have this argument all day about what the call to adventure is, because I don't actually think it is when he gets that hologram. I think it's when he comes home and his aunt and uncle are dead, because now he has no other options and he must go on this adventure. However, is the call to adventure, this is almost like textbook because it was written to be that way, right? To really mirror Joseph Campbell's hero's journey idea. George Lucas talks about like very much being inspired by that. So there is like the inciting incident, which is like at the top of the movie, which is that Princess Leia's ship is attacked and the plans go down to Luke's planet. And then there's the call to adventure, which is, hey, we need your help. Obi-Wan Kenobi, we need your help. And Luke being like, nah, we got to erase your processor. This isn't really a thing we're doing.
Right.
And then R2 does his own thing. And so Luke is resisting the call to adventure. Then he's forced to go after this R2 unit. And in the process meets with Ben, Obi-Wan. In doing that, that causes him to not be home when his aunt and uncle are killed. And now he has no other choice but to accept the call to adventure. So that's kind of like how it's written out to be. But like, you can't, you can't really write to that for everything. It's so different for everything.
It's wild because I was thinking that I used to know this like inside and out. I could reference Hero's Journey. I could talk about Blake Snyder. I could talk about Sid Field. I used to read all of these books. I knew them inside and out, but I feel like over time, like I have forgotten the specifics of each of these like quote unquote rules. I just know that something needs to happen to our hero to have their world flipped, and they need to go and do their thing.
I think that's the key. I think like the takeaway from all these screenwriting books and the takeaway from reading and writing so much is that unless you're doing some kind of like indie weirdness, which is equally valid, but if you're writing something that's like a pretty standard structure, theatrical thing, it's important to like hold these ideas in your head, but not be sort of a victim to them, right?
Yeah.
Like it's important, like exactly as you said, like it's important that there is something that draws your character out of their status quo into the adventure of your movie. Whether your movie is a true like space odyssey adventure or it's just a road trip with mom across California, it doesn't matter how big or small that adventure is. Your movie is an adventure in one way or the other. And that call to adventure simply means that your character is in a status quo and then is drawn by something out of it. Now, whether you want your character to resist that call and then only decide later to take up the call is entirely up to you, the world you've created and the characters and what they would do. And I think what kind of pisses me off about screenwriting books is they tell you they have to resist the call first. And then they get down to these things of like, if they resist the call here, then at this page, like page 75, they have to accept the call. Or if like something good happens at page 50, something bad has to happen at page 75. And you're like, what the fuck are you even talking about right now?
I'm loving Fired Up Tasha right now.
You're loving Tasha drinking wine and podcasting at the same time.
Well, just, speaking from the heart. Anyway, I just wanted to bring it up. This is a little question we got.
But sorry, to go back to the person's question, was there a question whether the puppy moment is the inciting incident or the call to action?
It was really more so like, hey, what exactly is a call to action? To which I said, you just have to have your hero's life get flipped upside down. Like there has to be something. It can actually be the call of you calling me to be like, hey, I need you to go swim with those sharks over there.
Yeah.
And then I go do it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because I may be blending the John Wicks, which is entirely possible. But before the puppy is killed, doesn't someone like come to John Wick prior to that? I'm thinking of two.
I think you're thinking of two. In one, he sees the gang at the gas station, and they ask for his car, and he says no. And then they end up basically going to beat up John Wick, and they kill his dog.
So the inciting incident is the gas station. He gets on the bad guy's radar.
Yeah, I suppose so.
And they decide to start the movie by going after John Wick. And then the call to action is him seeing that his dog has been killed and deciding, I'm going to go on this adventure of the movie and fuck everyone up.
Yeah, you can't kill John Wick's dog. Like, what were they thinking?
Get away with it? Are you kidding me?
No. It's just not happening.
I hope that if anyone ever killed my dog, I would be as equally vengeful.
I hope so too.
All right. My question?
Well, how about I do one more?
Okay.
Here's a question we got. Does development help or ruin movies? That's the gist of it. The question essentially was, how does development help or ruin movies? And the question proceeded to kind of go a bit more about how development is more problematic for movies. And I thought it was just a really interesting question because...
Like versus television or...
It was movie specific, so I don't know. But we can talk about television.
We've both been in development hell, so it's
hell yeah.
We can both speak to it.
Yeah.
I mean, development both hurts and helps it. It really depends on each scenario is different.
Mm-hmm.
And for context, I do feel like this is a huge question. Like, it could be an entire episode, I feel like. Just talking about the intricacies of how development hell happens. So if people are interested, email us. We can certainly do a whole topic on this. But for some context on why development hell happens, so that we can talk about whether it's good or bad. Oftentimes, the people who are producers and executives have never been writers. They've never taken a writing class. They just didn't come up in the business that way. A lot of them maybe came up with business degrees or literature degrees, and they knew they loved movies and they wanted to get into it somehow, but they didn't have a writing or a directing ability. But there's still this other avenue of being involved in films, which is producing. And that's totally fine. But when it comes to actually reading a piece of writing material, thinking about it creatively, and also, as an executive, you're pulled in multiple directions. Not only do you want the best creative thing possible, you also have to make sure that this movie makes its money back, so that your boss is happy, so that your boss's financiers are happy, so that nobody loses their job. It is a business. So you're pulled in these multiple directions, and so that when you give notes, you're giving notes sometimes out of fear because, hey, like on Monday, a movie crashed that was expected to do like huge numbers. But when we got the numbers back on Monday after the weekend, this movie about a woman spy just did terribly. So actually this woman spy thing that we're developing, maybe we make it a dude spy because people they're just not seeing movies with women as spies. Like, that's the conclusion they have made at the end of that. So like, you're battling a lot of fear-based reactions to the market, because that's partly their job. Mm-hmm. And you're battling people who aren't specifically creative, so they can give notes that we talked about in a lot of our episodes. Go back to our notes, sort of taking and giving episodes, where we talk about how some producers will give notes who aren't particularly creative, and like how to sort of see your way through their note as a writer. I think when I've been in development hell, it's been mostly based on fear that this movie's not going to do well for X, Y, or Z reasons. So we have to fix those things. But as soon as you, quote unquote, fix those things, new problems seem to arise.
Right.
Because you've just tried to address a note that's not a real note, right? You made it a man instead of a woman, but now this causes all these kind of ripple effect problems. Or like development hell could happen because the regime changes. And this has happened to plenty of my friends who have developed something, they were ready to go into production, and then their execs get fired, and new execs come in who have no relationship to this project, mm-hmm. have no love for it. Sometimes there's even bad blood where they're like, I don't want a project that someone else had because that makes me look bad, so I'm going to get rid of it. Like, there's all kinds of reasons that are sort of political that development hell can happen. And then I think the question is, does it hurt or help a project? I think it can. I'm in a situation right now where I'm writing a movie where one point of view could be it's development hell. It's a lot of meetings with executives to come up with the best version of this movie, when normally that's sort of not how movies are made. You often will pitch on a movie, they'll love your idea, they'll hire you, and then you go off to write the script or treatment or outline, whatever that first step is. In this case, we're having a lot of development meetings, but every meeting we have, because the execs are smart, we're actually getting closer and closer to the best version of this movie, the same way that Josh and I do when we have a Zoom. Mm-hmm. So there's development hell that can work if you're really open to it and the people are smart and they have really good sort of instinctual feelings about story. And then there's the hell version, which you will experience when you can tell immediately that they don't have a gift for story, but they still want to give you extensive story notes.
Yeah, I just went through an emotional roller coaster listening to you because so much of it resonated. And just thinking about the multiple times I've been in development hell. And the worst part is that script kind of goes away. It just kind of exists in development, or otherwise known as just kicking around. And it sucks. It sucks when something falls there because it always hurts when you lose momentum. And I've at least found when people aren't sure-footed with some of their early decisions and it starts turning into, oh, well, what about this? What about that? It's never a great thing. Like I just have been in bad scenarios where people who are insecure about what they're saying, it just never ends.
Yeah.
You know, people who don't know what they want, you're trying to give them what they want, but they don't fully, you know, it's people, I think a lot of execs, we've talked about this before, are just looking for confidence from a writer.
Yeah.
And you have to have like a subtle way to tell people exactly what they want.
Yeah. It's a gift.
I think you have that gift.
I think I'm developing the gift.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough because I'm not someone, I don't like to make waves. I don't like conflict. If I had my druthers, I would just be like a loner living in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. So like when someone says something that makes me have to stand up and say, actually, with all due respect, I don't think that's right. I think it's this way. And I'm putting my foot down about it. Mm-hmm. It's really hard for me and I hate it. And I don't always do it when I should. But it's an important gift to keep sort of nurturing, I think.
Yeah, of course. Okay. What's your question?
Okay. So someone asked me, when you're developing IP, video games, comic books, doesn't matter, what are some common pitfalls that people will fall into that you can avoid? Josh,
yeah.
As a lover of IPs, for some reason, the True Lies TV show came to mind.
Yeah.
That is based on one of your favorite properties of all time.
Yeah.
The True Lies movie, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis. Like, what pitfall do you think they might have fallen into in creating the TV show, if you could guess?
Well, I have to be honest and tell you, I didn't finish the pilot of True Lies. Yeah. And I think that may have had to do with the fact that it was on a network. It was network TV. I don't think True Lies has any business being on network TV. And some of the pitfalls that I think they probably tried to be a little true, no pun intended, to True Lies, in the sense of, and I believe the TV show, they were the main characters, like Harry Tasker and I think it's Harry and Helen. Where I feel like with IP, in my opinion, there should just be spin-offs of, all right, so we have Back to the Future or True Lies. Now, what happens to someone who finds a flux capacitor? Or what happens to someone who knows Arnold Schwarzenegger? Or, you know, like I feel like it should always be adjacent to whatever the IP is. And that's just my opinion. It's different for video games.
Because like, why cover territory you've already been on?
Yeah, why cover territory? Everyone's looking at it through a different lens. I think it creates a difference when you're kind of creating a world. You're like branching off and you're saying, it's like the Goonies. How cool would it be if there was a story about One-Eyed Willie? You know, like that kind of thing. It's like, all right, well, what else can we pick at? And then we can kind of bring it all and tie it all together. So to answer your question, I don't fully know what went wrong with that True Lies TV show. I probably would say it's because it started on network TV, and I would happily take a stab at it. But I don't know what went wrong.
I mean, being too true to the IP is definitely a pitfall, in my opinion, because True Lies was a movie, not a TV show. So to expand it requires you to just, by the very nature of how time works, needing to create multiple episodes of a thing that's longer than 2 hours, you're going to have to do a lot of reinvention, and allowing yourself to reinvent to the point of maybe it being very different, I think is part of the struggles of someone who adapts material, but is also important to pay attention to, because we've definitely seen things. And this was, I think, really common in like the 90s and 80s, more than 90s, when they would like try to adapt comic books and video games, but clearly with writers who had no idea what those properties were.
Sure.
There was a sense of like, just do what's in the book. We'll just do what's in the book and the fans will love it. But it's a book. It doesn't translate into movies. You have to fiddle with it so that it fits. Otherwise it's a round peg in a square hole. So I think that's a pitfall for me that's really common, is seeing people trying to stay too faithful. I think another pitfall to me is it's trying to write something with fans in your head, like giving you notes during the process.
You never want to try to go in to appease people, because that will never happen.
Right, because everyone has a different version of how they experienced that IP.
Mm-hmm.
And all you can know is what's beloved generally. Like Indiana Jones as an IP, let's say we were hired as a co-writing team to rewrite it. One of the first things we do is we would talk about, and maybe even write down, all the things that feel so inherent to those stories and that character that you absolutely cannot lose. Like, what are the fundamentals of the experience of watching an Indiana Jones movie? And not only is it his look, his iconic hat, his crooked, lopsided smile, just like his personality and his appearance, but it's like how in every fight he always is at a low point and he's almost going to get beaten, and he's definitely not a superhero. Like, that's a big part of who he is. Right? So there's these like things that you write down that you know fans will be absolutely horrified to see not in there. Not because they're fans, but because why the fuck are you adapting this IP at all if you're not going to be faithful to what made it so good? And so I think another pitfall, though, can be going into more specifics. Like, let's say, like my husband really likes the Crystal Skull movie, which I didn't even know existed.
Wait, what? Really? Wow.
I saw it and promptly forgot about it. I like took it out of my memory.
That's right.
Like Eternal Sunshine.
You don't even include it.
I don't acknowledge it.
Wow.
But for him, like, he enjoyed parts of it. And I'm not going to sit here and like go, oh, well, but there are people who love Crystal Skull, so I'm going to have to make sure that the things that they loved about it are in this as well. Like, I don't do a list that's like, oh, like what do like a bunch of fans love and how do I do that? However, the caveat to that, unfortunately, is that if you are adapting IP, I think it's really important that you love the material. You're the stand-in for the fans, right? Like, you know.
Of course, you have to love it.
You have to. You know how Indiana Jones moves, and you're going to make sure he moves that way when you adapt it. Just how he speaks, just like little things that fans are going to love to see, you're going to love to see. And that's why you should be adapting it. So like, to me, that pitfall of like not paying attention to the fans comes with the caveat of yourself being a fan.
Would you watch an Indiana Jones movie? Would you
Yes.
buy?
Yes.
If there is, it's called Indiana Jones.
Okay.
And
Uh-oh.
it takes place in the future of wherever Indiana Jones is. Let's just say, for the sake of this argument, the 1980s. Okay, Indiana Jones is long gone, but there is a con artist who is a bit of an adventurer, and he ends up stealing the identity of one Professor Indiana Jones. And he starts going around saying he's Indiana Jones, finding and getting himself into trouble. Basically, he steals his identity. Would you watch that version of Indiana Jones, of like just trying to get this new adventurer out into the world? And so Indiana Jones isn't a person anymore. Now it's just an identity. It's a way of life.
Like James Bond.
Like James Bond.
Listen, I'm both infuriated by what you just said
Yeah.
and intrigued.
There we go.
Because as a fan, I would want to watch anything that comes out that's Indiana Jones related. This is why I love The Mummy, because he was just a different version of Indiana Jones.
So this is Indiana Jones, but if he fights a mummy in Egypt, you're like, in. Sold. Do you know, I once tried to pitch an idea of a buddy comedy with two characters that were basically Indiana Jones and James Bond. Do you remember that?
No. Do
Yeah.
I? That sounds incredible.
Yeah, it went nowhere. But anyway.
I think this leads very well into one of your questions, doesn't it? You tried to pitch an idea.
Yes. Wow, what a segue. The question was, do you need a script, and why can't you just pitch an idea?
So the answer to that is you can pitch an idea. A lot of people sell pitches as pitches.
Yeah.
And a conversation I always have with my manager when I come up with a new idea is this a pitch or do you want to write it? And the conversations around both of those often look a little something like this. is it something that is really hard for someone to understand unless they see it? Meaning, is the world totally bonkers and feels so expensive if you tell someone about it? It's a sci-fi world set on Mars, but it's small. It's really small and it's really contained. It's like, is it though? It's in a colony city set on Mars and people have Martian superpowers. Like, no, just trust me, right? I think of like Burn Night, the Chris Sparling script that we read recently in our Act 2 podcast script club that we did.
Yeah.
And imagine pitching that, which is, so once a year, every year, dragons come out and they pick a random place in the world and they blow fire and kill everybody. And I'm an executive. I'm thinking, I'm not going to do a fucking dragon movie. Are you kidding me? We are hemorrhaging. I can't afford a dragon movie. And you're like, no, it's small. We barely will see the dragons. Really?
Yeah.
I'll show you. Let me write the script. Like, that's a version where I might write something if it's execution dependent, in other words. Or is an idea very, not just like the world feels too crazy, but like, is the concept a little difficult to wrap your mind around in a pitch? Because the one thing about a pitch is it has to be so clean, so obvious for it to sell. You have like a lot of hurdles, I think, in pitching that are fewer if you just write the script and show the person how amazing it could be. On the other hand, there's the other argument, which is writing a script takes a long time. Writing a pitch takes much less. I can write a pitch in a month. A good pitch ready to take out in a month. It takes me months, if not a year sometimes, to write a spec. So that time is it's just the time risk management there just makes way more sense. But also I have my personality to go with it. I have like my hands and my voice and how I get excited, and I have imagery that I could show in the room, and I have all these extra tools to use to help sell this thing. So that's also the benefit of just pitching something versus writing something. I can sometimes get someone more excited about the idea in a pitch than if they just read it, because maybe just the writing of it is like, okay, like I get it. But when you hear me talk about like how it's all going to work together and how beautiful it's going to be and what these set pieces are going to feel like and the emotion experience of the audience, like when I include all these exciting things in my pitch, it's much stronger than potentially reading it without those things. So either exist. Both are just different conversations depending on where you are and what you want out of something. I will say it is often harder to sell a pitch. Not often, it is. It's just harder to sell a pitch. Very few people that I know of have done it, especially if it's not based on IP.
Yeah, especially right now. And the reason behind that is because it's just a higher risk for the people across the table trying to buy this idea, right? Like they hear your excitement, they see your story as you've pitched it, but without being able to read it to see if it really works, I don't know, the distance between you pitching it to me and then you submitting a script in 6 months is pretty far. And what if you don't deliver? Yeah.
Like your pitch really has to be foolproof. Versus a script, if you read it, I submit it to Josh, who's an executive. He goes, oh, okay, like I have notes on this, but I can see how this concept works and functions, how it brings people in from, you know, how it brings the audience in, how it excites, and I can see how to market it, right? That's a big thing. When I have a script, I can see how to market it. If you have a pitch, that's another thing they'll think about it when you're in the room. How do I market this thing that this person is pitching to me? So it's harder to pitch and sell. It's easier to pitch. It's easier to sell a script. But both are equally valid paths.
I agree with everything.
I talked way too much on that topic.
No, you did not talk enough. Keep going.
Is it hot in here or?
It is actually. It's very hot. We're in separate locations, but I'm getting hot. Is it hot? Yeah. No, that was great. Do you have another question?
I do. Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Okay. This is from someone who emailed us, Benjamin. Thank you very much. Sorry it's taken us so long to get back to you, Benjamin. Benjamin wrote us that they are getting an MFA in screenwriting. They kind of pivoted their life to from another subject they were studying into film, which is very cool. It's a very scary thing to do, so I'm very proud of you. They have a 2-part question. One is to me and one is to you. So I'm going to ask yours first. Josh, I would love to hear your thoughts, having not gone through an MFA program. Is there a common trap that you find MFA screenwriters fall into?
No, I have no idea because I don't know who's an MFA screenwriter.
I guess like new people from film school or like just out of film school in general.
Yeah, I'm trying to think any common traps. I hate this is such a bad answer, but no. Maybe just being a little too formulaic, but maybe I'm just projecting my own early beginnings. The other thing is, and I hate to say it, but I'm not reading a lot of the scripts from people who are just kind of coming out of film school.
I feel like you're right about the formulaicness because we come out of school with all of these rules that have been sort of ingrained in us and taught to us, because that's the whole point of an MFA program, that you will start to learn to shed, I think, as you find your voice. And I think...
I got something.
Yeah.
I did actually something. So I actually have, without reading scripts, I've talked to people about their scripts. And a lot of times they're incredibly, not saying always, but a good portion of time, like people come out and they want to just do their own weird thing, right? Like their super fucking odd version of whatever script they want to, whatever story they want to tell. And I do think that maybe sometimes people kind of fall into the trap, which, by the way, this script is a necessary script because I think everyone writes them, that just kind of off-the-wall bonkers no one will ever make. And it's kind of either a little too dark or it's a little too, expensive. It's just something that just doesn't line up. That's all. Without reading scripts, I have talked to people where someone would be like, and then their head explodes in like Act 1, and then the pieces come back together in Act 2, or like something where you're like, yeah, I don't know, man. That sounds like an indie movie that you're going to have to like finance on your own, which I fully support. But
yeah, Josh was a producer in his before lives.
Oh yeah,
you sort of found these kinds of projects. I feel like
I did. Yeah, Jesus, that's right. I'm gonna take it
years ago.
Oh my God,
early Josh.
Uh-huh.
But to Josh's point, I feel like those scripts are necessary. Like you have to get through that, and then you have to maybe be told this doesn't work and why, for you to start sort of honing in on who you really are as a writer. Like I didn't find my voice, I think, until kind of later. Like there was a lack of confidence, I think, in my early writing because I was just trying to figure myself out. So I think that can be one. Just not knowing how the business works is one. Mm-hmm. But that's also, it's a part of speaking to the question that Benjamin asked me, which was, having been through an MFA program, is there anything that I wish I knew before I started? And it's unfortunately something you can't really learn in school because they don't teach it that way, which is just how the business actually functions and what your true role as a writer is. And I always thought my true role is just to write an awesome killer script and then, sell it and then go on to my next one. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize all these other adjacent skills that I needed to truly be a good writer, which are, Benjamin listens to the podcast, so all the many things that we talk about as random skills that we didn't really know we needed. I think that's sort of like the biggest missing piece from being in an MFA program. An MFA program was great. Like I got a lot out of it in that I did not study film theory. I did not study films as an undergraduate. When I watched movies growing up and loved movies, they were always big blockbuster things. I didn't have anyone to talk to about them. Mm-hmm. So I didn't think about lighting and the way structure worked or anything like that. I just fucking loved Mulan and Terminator. Okay. So for me, it was important to go to school to learn these things so that when I came out, I can practically use them as part of my business to build these scripts. So I think it's important for some people in that way, but just know that you're going to need to learn the business. And maybe that's part of one of the common traps that new graduates have, is kind of an expectation of where they're going to be when they come out of film school. which by the way, there are people every day who break this, right? Who like, they do a short film in college and they come out and they immediately get Maze Runner.
For sure.
Right? It happens, and it's really, really cool, and that's what's so awesome about our business. However, be prepared for you not to be that 1% and know how much work it actually takes to achieve your dream once you get out of school. And that stick-to-itiveness is really the key to success. Like staying here when other people leave because it's too hard. That to me is like the common thread and the missing piece of new grads.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. All right. So coming in with a Tomb Raider question. Okay. Final thing. Could you discuss how you reconcile Lara's emotional journey in Shadow of the Tomb Raider with her focus on Roth and Yamatai? Mm-hmm. Their grief and pain in the show. More specifically, what caused her grief over Roth Yamatai to resurface after Shadow of Tomb Raider, where we didn't see as much of it. Did that make sense? Because I was reading it.
It made complete sense. And I think the subtext of the question is, why the fuck did you choose this story? Okay, so I am going to be totally honest about this choice. And it is multifold. Absolutely. So there are 3 video games that the Lara Croft from my show, Tomb Raider, Legend of Lara Croft, comes from. And it's the game in 2013, the game Rise of the Tomb Raider, and then the game Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which this person mentions in their question as the last video game. So my show takes place right after that last video game. Now, my show deals with Lara being upset over her mentor dying and feeling like she's to blame for her mentor's death. And that mentor died in the 2013 game, not in the last game, the Shadow of the Tomb Raider. So if my show takes place right after Shadow of the Tomb Raider, how could she possibly still be grieving this person from the 2013 game? And I understand that there is a sort of time disconnect. However, imagine you are me starting to write this show.
Okay.
And you want to start Lara from a place of emotion. I wanted to start Lara from a low point. I wanted her to be, because she is this superhero. So what happens when a superhero is broken? Mm-hmm. And that's who I wanted to start with, because I wanted to build her into that superhero that we know from the iconic 90s Angelina Jolie kind of version of herself. Well, I could invent something totally new. That is absolutely possible. I could have done that. However, I feel like it would have felt forced. It would have felt disconnected from the video games and who she had sort of grown into. It would have been me kind of like inventing my own canon of why Lara is broken right now. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something that felt inherent to who she was. And in my opinion, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, just to give you context, Josh, in that game, Lara Croft nearly ushers in the apocalypse because she believes that in doing this, she may be able to reverse the fact that her father's dead. And like all the pain that's happened to her, maybe I could reverse it and like sacrifice the world in the process. Wow. And she almost decides to do that, and then at the last minute changes her mind.
Good for her.
Good for her. But she's dealing with dad stuff. And as we know from having talked about this on the show before, everyone's tired of Lara dealing with dad stuff. She's dealt with dad stuff pretty much like since we met her. And so I knew we didn't want to do dad stuff anymore. Well, who did die in her life that was extremely important to her that, in my opinion, she has not yet gotten over? Well, it's her mentor who died in the first game. And the reason I feel like she hasn't gotten over that is because she went right into game 2 and then right into game 3. So it was a lot of just like covering up her pain, her original pain, like her original sin in a way, her original pain, like this mentor who died before she really became this adventurer Lara Croft. She was still just a college student at the time. To like witness him dying and to also kind of be to blame for it is a really heavy thing that feels like Lara was covering up with action, with revenge, with insert adrenaline junkie thing here. And so I wanted to meet Lara at a place that A, connected to the video games and wasn't totally new and bizarrely disconnected to who she was. And B, it was my chance to help her, I think, get over something that I don't think she fully felt and gotten her way through. And then, I'm sorry, last piece is that I really wanted to move Lara past grief entirely. And so by dealing with Roth, and she also deals with her dad in the show, she kind of, by the end of the series, by episode 7, and then leading into 8, she makes the conscious choice, oh, I'm not going to be like my dad. I'm not going to be like Roth. I'm going to be something new. That's going to jump us off now to season 2, where she's going to decide to be her own adventure, now kind of unconnected emotionally to the video games she came from. So, but we needed the process of season 1 to move her through that. So that is my big, involved, truthful answer. I hope that it made sense to people who weren't just Tomb Raider fans.
No, I was following along, and I was thinking to myself, I didn't really realize it, but I guess Angelina Jolie's character is the fully realized version of Tomb Raider.
Yeah.
They were just like, here she is.
Yep.
You're a superhero.
Yep.
Interesting. So I like that. It's almost, yeah, where do you go from there? You have to go backwards.
Mine's an origin story.
No, of course.
That's we love origin stories.
There's nothing better than a good origin story. There's nothing better. That was fantastic.
That's it, huh?
I think that's it.
Well, we did it.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow. What a day.
Mailbag. Please send us more questions like this, different, more questions about what we talked about. If you want to dig into anything deeper, we are always here, and we love the mailbag episodes.
Yeah, this is like my favorite stuff.
It's the best. All right. Quote of the day. You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. It was books that taught me that the things that tormented me most were the very things that connected me with all the people who were alive, who had ever been alive. James Baldwin.
Nice.
Please remember to rate and subscribe. Follow us at ActTwoWriters for more awesome writing stuff. You can follow me, Tasha, at Story Thursday on Instagram, or on Twitter at Tasha 3.0.
I'm Joshua Hallman on Twitter, Josh Hallman on Instagram.
And as always, the Act 2 podcast is a production of Act 2, a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter. This episode was edited by Paul Lundquist.